So we're getting weird today. Flanders Red is a weird style. It's our first sour beer style, meaning we're going to get into fun stuff like acetobacter and Brettanomyces and barrel aging and blending. It's going to be a lot. A lot of stuff to cover in this one. In addition to the complicated process of brewing the beer, there's also a small geography lesson that is relevant to the style. So we're going to get into some Belgian geography today. That's going to be fun. Have I said fun enough yet? I think we should jump right in. No time to delay. So, according to the BJCP, a Flanders Red Ale is a sour, fruity, red wine-like Belgian-style ale with interesting supportive malt flavors and fruity complexity. The dry finish and tannin completes the mental image of a fine red wine. That's a good point to make. Flanders Red has a lot of similarities to a red wine. It's very fruity, it's not hoppy, it's got a nice punch of tannins. It is the most wine-like beer style out there, but that doesn't mean anyone is going to confuse it for a wine. Maybe if they just look at the bottle, then they could make that mistake, but one sip in, it should be obvious that this one is assuredly not a wine. No wine that I know of has such an intense sour character. Some brands of Flanders Red Ale even have a vinegar note to them, something you definitely don't want in your wine. The nose on a Flanders Red has a lot going on. It is fruity and sour. It has notes of black cherries, oranges, plums, red currants. It can have a touch of vanilla or chocolate in there too. Being a Belgian beer, it will have some spicy phenols, though they may be difficult to detect with everything else going on. The sour character can range, according to the guidelines, from balanced to intense. Any Flanders Red I've ever had has been on the intense side of that equation. And it says that prominent vinegary acetic character is inappropriate. So they can have a touch of vinegar, just not too much. Anyway, a little goes a long way when it comes to drinking vinegar, or smelling vinegar. There are hops here, but they will not be noticeable on the nose. Diacetyl, which we've discussed before, as having a movie theater butter flavor, can be perceived in very small quantities too, as a complementary aroma. The longer you put off taking a sip of a Flanders Red, or really any beer with a lot of complexity, the more it will open up to you. Man, that makes me sound creepy. But it's true, you can get so much from a beer's aroma. You might look pretentious as fuck, but if you swirl the beer around in the glass and take short little sniffs and let it warm up slowly, you'll get so much more out of that beer than if you just give it a whiff and slam it down your throat. I'm not saying either way is wrong, just that the way you should drink your beer is situational. Anyway, the appearance of a Flanders Red is, you guessed it, red. They can actually range anywhere from a deep red, which is one of my favorite Dario Argento movies, by the way, Profondo Rosso, to burgundy, to a pale reddish brown color. They have good clarity, and they have a white or pale tan head with some good retention. This beer, like many Belgian beers, should leave you with some nice lacing in your glass. Flavor-wise, you're going to get a lot of the same stuff as in the aroma. It would be weird if you didn't. The intense fruitiness may include notes of plum, orange, black cherry, red currant, among others. Mild vanilla or chocolate character is often present. Spicy phenols too. The sour flavor can range from complementary to intense, and it can have a strong acidic bite. But it's not just sour. Few Belgian beers are one note. Stella Artois is the only one that springs to mind. This one, in addition to being sour, has a soft, toasty maltiness that complements the acidity, making it less assertive. Some examples of the style are quite balanced when it comes to their sour to malty ratio. Others, of course, have their malt quality firmly planted in the background. None of them present much in the way of hops. At most, you might get some residual hop bitterness. But there is also that nice tannic bitterness, which is what gives the beer that aged red wine character and finish. As with the aroma, prominent vinegary acetic character is inappropriate. Any acetic acid should be slight. Likewise, if you get any diacetyl in the flavor, it too should be very faint, nearly imperceptible. The main flavors here, again, are a balanced maltiness to complement the fruity, sour, wine-like essence of the Flanders Red Ale. The style is medium-bodied, with a low to medium level of carbonation. There will also be low to medium levels of astringency, like that you would get in a well-aged red wine, often with a prickly acidity. The finish is light and crisp on the palate. It's refreshing, with a slightly sweet finish being detectable in some examples. You may also get a bit of mouth-puckering acidity on the palate. So, traditionally, Flanders Red Ale is blended, with an older, barrel-aged beer being mixed with a fresher beer to balance the sourness and acidity. This blending will add to the smoothness and the complexity of the beer. The reddish color is a product of the malt, but the aging process will also darken the beer. Due to the bacteria used, which can ferment any kind of sugar, these beers can have an apparent attenuation of up to 98%. So, very dry beers. Now, to get into the history of the style, we have to talk about Belgium as a country. It is geographically divided into two regions. The northern half, Flanders, is Dutch-speaking, and the French-speaking southern half is called Wallonia. The beers of Flanders are the result of a multicultural approach to brewing that stems from the region's close proximity to Germany, England, and the Netherlands. The blending of old and young batches, for instance, may have been something that Belgian brewers picked up from the English. Of course, this could have happened the other way around. It's hard to say for sure. But that willingness to adopt techniques from other countries helped to shape the characters of Flanders Reds, as well as Flanders Browns, which are also called Oud Bruins. Blends eventually fell out of favor in England, but not in Flanders. These brewers also resisted the movement away from spontaneous fermentation and favored the more predictably consistent strains of yeast being developed. They dug in with their traditions, shunning newer technology and lighter, paler beers in favor of their own classic styles. And the beers they make in Flanders are very different from the ones produced in Wallonia. I couldn't track down much information regarding the origins of the Flanders Red Ale. I found some claims that the term Flanders Red was coined by Rodenbach as a marketing tool to differentiate it from the Oud Bruin, but there's no concrete evidence of this that I could locate. Rodenbach does make archetypal Flanders Red Ales, though. The Rodenbach Classic has been winning awards since 1894, so they very well could have originated the style, but I can't say for sure. Flanders Red Ale typically uses an eclectic mix of organisms to produce its distinctive flavor profile. Most beer styles use yeast from the genus known as Saccharomyces. This includes Saccharomyces cerevisiae, which is used in the production of ales, and Saccharomyces pasteurianus, which is used in lagers. The Flanders Red, however, likes to throw some other stuff into the mix. Brettanomyces is used for the same purpose as these other yeast strains, that is to ferment sugar into ethanol, but it is far less predictable as far as fermentation times and flavor profiles are concerned. Draftmag.com has a great write-up on Brettanomyces. I'll try to remember to post a link to the article on social media because it contains a solid quote from the late great beer author Michael Jackson about the nature of Brett strains. He says, "Saccharomyces is like a dog, and Brett is like a cat. It's a little less predictable. It's going to do its own thing. It's not going to come when you call it and sit when you say sit. If you can respect its individuality and suggest rather than dictate what it does in your fermentation, it can reward the brewer and the drinker." And that's very true. Whereas Saccharomyces strains can fully ferment a beer in a matter of weeks, even days, Brett can ferment for well over a year and still not be done. That's because it breaks down longer chains of sugar molecules. That's why it is typically used for secondary fermentation, often done in a wood barrel. Brett is responsible for many of the unique fermentation characteristics you'll find in sour beers. When you hear people describe a beer as having notes of horse blanket or barnyard, that's coming from the Brett. It's a funky, rustic character that is difficult to describe. It's one of those flavors you have to experience to fully understand. But Brettanomyces is not the sole player here. Another pair of agents that contribute to the distinctly tart flavors in Flanders Red Ales are a couple of strains of bacteria, Lactobacillus and Pediococcus. Lacto converts sugar into lactic acid rather than ethanol. This lowers the pH, making the beer more sour. It's a fairly clean sour flavor though, whereas Brett and Pediococcus kick out a lot of other funkiness too. Besides that, Lacto and Pedio essentially do the same thing. They create lactic acid. Then we have Acetobacter. So many new terms we're learning today. Sorry they're so rapid fire like this. I'll make sure we discuss them all further when we cover other sour beers. So, Acetobacter are less commonly used bacteria. I just realized that I may have been using the singular when talking about bacteria, when it should have been the plural. So, sorry about that, grammar nerds. I do realize that bacteria is the plural form of bacterium. There's no need to press send on that tweet you're furiously writing. Just let it go. But either way, Acetobacter is not used as much as other souring bacteria because it has a tendency to turn beer into vinegar. This is why it's not as popular as Lactobacillus or Pediococcus. Some other key ingredients in a Flanders Red, it uses a base of Vienna and Munich malts, Vienna and or Munich malts, I guess I should say, as well as light to medium caramel malts and a small amount of Special B. Special B is the darkest of the Belgian caramel malts, and it gives a beer that dark, heavy caramel taste, as well as some burnt sugar and dark, dried fruit flavors. The BJCP guidelines here say that maize is also used at up to 20% of the mash. This might seem dumb, but I don't know if they mean corn or if they mean maize. I know that historically the two words used to mean different things, especially in Europe. In Britain, for example, corn can mean any type of cereal crop or grain, but maize is what we in America think of as corn, so I guess that's what they mean. I think of maize as like flint corn, you know, what some people call Indian corn. It's that multicolored corn that's mostly decorative. So maybe they said maize to avoid confusing readers from other countries. Maybe I'm just overthinking it and confusing myself. That's probably the case. Anyway, now that I've allowed myself to get derailed by one little word, where was I? So Flanders Reds don't use American hops, obviously. Nothing with high alpha acids. They tend to favor low alpha acid continental hops like Hallertau or Saaz, something like that. You want the IBUs to stay low, and you don't want any of those big citrusy notes. Flanders Reds can be very close to Oud Bruins, sometimes called Flanders Browns, even insofar as they are brown beers, not really red. The main difference in the two styles is that the Oud Bruin is more malty rich, while the red has more of a fruity tart profile. The red relies more heavily on Acetobacter, with the brown leaning more on Lactobacillus, giving it a softer acidity. In terms of vital statistics, we have Flanders Red Ale, anywhere from 10 to 25 IBUs, so very little bitterness here, which makes sense with the lack of hops. SRM ranges from 10 to 16, that's deep amber to copper on the SRM scale, but these beers have more of a burgundy color, a deep red. Profondo Rosso. And the ABV range is from 4.6 to 6.5. There are a few commercial examples out there, not a ton, as this is a tricky, time-consuming beer style to produce, but there are enough that you should be able to track one down, regardless of where you live. The one I'm most familiar with is the Duchesse de Bourgogne from the brewery Verhage. There's also the Rodenbach Grand Cru, or the Rodenbach Classic. I think I mentioned that one earlier. I honestly don't know if Rodenbach makes any beers that aren't Flanders Reds. Jolly Pumpkin makes one called La Rosa, and the brewery, or Brewery Tarot or whatever, makes an Oud Tart. Both of those are killer craft versions of the style. And Distill out of Bloomington, Illinois, they make a solid Flanders Red Ale too, but I feel like theirs is cleaner than it should be. It's sour, but not necessarily as funky as I want, but still very drinkable, worth checking out. And I think that's about all I wanted to cover. That's all the guideline offers, so I guess that's all I have. Let's take a break. We'll catch our breath. We'll come back and do some homebrew tips with Thomas. Stay tuned.